Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, an annual ceremony is held in France to mark the National Day of the Abolition of Slavery. The commemoration's been going since 2006, but many still feel frustration over how little has tangibly been done to address some inequalities rooted in the legacy of the slave trade. Also, the practice has had an impact on the sense of identity, as some of the descendants of Africans who were enslaved centuries ago. Recently, more people from the French Caribbean have been heading to Africa to try to reconnect with parts of a long-lost culture. And as militia groups in eastern DR Congo are again accused of having brutally attacked communities in Ituri province, researchers from Amnesty International release a report warning that a year-long state of siege has exacerbated injustice and instability. But first, France banned slavery for good in 1848. On Tuesday, French President Emmanuel Macron attended a ceremony in Paris to mark the country's National Day of Remembrance of the slave trade, slavery, and their abolition. The events run every year since 2006, and France is the first and only country to have such a day and to declare slavery a crime against humanity. But despite this, many historians point out that France still struggles with addressing the legacy of its colonial past in any meaningful way, and that the fallout continues to impact minorities today.
The commemoration has become practically emptied of its meaning. It's kind of a symbolic thing, saying that slavery was bad, which is at least, the least we can say. But in terms of reparation, nothing has been done, nothing for the descendant of slave. I mean, in all the overseas territory, Martinique, Réunion, Guadeloupe, and Guyana, where you have descendant of slave, which were slave colony, no reparation has been done whatsoever. There is no, even the term reparation is practically forbidden in France. There is a moralistic approach, that was, some mistakes were made, some abuse were made, but the way in which is structured even our current society, the present, and especially anti-Black racism is not addressed. Discrimination in job, housing, in school, which had been even, that governmental agency have demonstrated. In the overseas department, the rate of unemployment is the same for decades, huge, like 60% among the young people. The rate of illiteracy are extremely high, 21% in Réunion Island. The poverty is below even the poverty level that is, seen as acceptable. There is a total dependency on France, absolutely dependency. Everything comes from France, so the life is very expensive. There is no access to land. Capital remain in the hand of the descendant of a slave owner. It's white men or women, some women coming from France are still in all the post of decision. They really rule the place, and decisions are taken without really consulting the people of this territory that are very important for France. I want to remind, because it makes France the second maritime power in the world.
Well, slavery was active in the French colonies since the early 16th century, and by about 1778, about 13,000 African people were being trafficked as slaves to the French West Indies every year. Today, some people from French Caribbean communities are curious about their historical African identities. Some have been heading towards West Africa, where many of their ancestors were first enslaved, in the hope of reconnecting with lost traditions. Our team sent us this report.
Bako is originally from Guadeloupe. The 30-year-old left everything to settle in Benin 3 years ago, several centuries after one of his ancestors was taken from Africa during the slave trade. François Gabour comes from Martinique. For his comic book project, the author spent a few weeks in Benin researching on the African heritage of the West Indies. Stephen chose a West African name, Bako, long before his arrival on the continent. Since then, he's continued his apprenticeship in Benin, off the beaten track and far from the usual tourism sites. He centered his studies at this primary school, where both the official curriculum and indigenous culture is taught. Here, students learn about topics like the virtues of plants and the divinatory art called the fa. For Bako, the healing of his identity requires above all reconnection with his voodoo heritage.
Je le vois aujourd'hui beaucoup plus comme une science et un mode de vie qui est totalement partie prenante de la culture. C'est en ce sens-là que pour moi c'était important. Mon objet était de renouer avec les origines de ma culture, de pouvoir renouer aussi avec cette partie spirituelle.
Une école du vaudou, c'est tellement inimaginable en Martinique et en Guadeloupe.
The Supreme Pontiff Voodoo Huendo, DAAGBO HOUNON II, comes to meet some of the Afro-descendants.
Nous devons tout faire pour que ceux-là qui sont partis involontairement et par force puissent retrouver leur véritable source.
Francois was invited 2 days later to a traditional clairvoyant consultation. He chooses not to participate. Stefan was previously initiated into Haitian voodoo and so is more comfortable learning more about this aspect of West African spiritual tradition.
La première des réparations serait finalement celle-là, de pouvoir reprendre le fil là où il a été coupé, de pouvoir reprendre ce dont on nous a dépossédé en réalité en déportant nos aïeux dans les Caraïbes.
The voodoo practitioners have never forgotten these Africans that were transported to the West Indies and the Americas. Every year since 1728, on the 10th of January, they have performed rituals to celebrate uprooted ancestors and call their descendants back. Today, about 50 Afro-Caribbeans have made their way back to Benin to remain indefinitely.
Now, the news, at least 14 people have been killed in an overnight attack on a displaced persons camp in Ituri province in eastern DR Congo. Locals have blamed the militant Codeco group, who they accuse of staging another attack on Sunday in which 35 people were killed nearby. North Kivu and Ituri have been rocked by violence for decades. Last year, they were placed under a state of siege, which has been extended 22 times. Rights activists say that it's just made things worse and has also been used by Congolese authorities to crush dissent. Earlier, I spoke to Amnesty International's Jean-Moubert Senga.
We are concerned because the state of siege was proclaimed with the promise that it would help rapidly restore peace and improve civilian protection, but it seems not to have happened. Actually, the situation has deteriorated in terms of attacks on civilians and civilian casualties. And in addition to that, the military and police officers appointed by President Tshisekedi have used their extraordinary powers to crash down on dissent and to silence anyone who dares to criticize them. So that's why we are concerned, because in addition to the suffering of the people of North Kivu and Ituri from attacks by armed groups, they've now been targeted by the security forces who are supposed to protect them.
And do you believe from your research that this erosion of rights that you've documented was a deliberate objective when the state of siege was initially brought in? I honestly don't think it was a deliberate objective by the authorities, but it has been the consequence, and they are aware that it is the case. So our hope is that they are going to take action. They are going to take steps very quickly to address those concerns. Mm-hmm. And from your research, you don't see any specifically positive outcome of the state of siege since it was brought in?
There is no positive outcome whatsoever from the state of siege when you see it from its, if you look at its stated objectives, which was to improve security and to dismantle armed groups. Armed groups have not been dismantled. Not one single armed group has been dismantled, and civilian protection has not improved. Actually, the casualties, the number of casualties has more than doubled according to the figures from the UN. So there is no single outcome in terms of security or human rights in that region.
Give us a bit of a sense of the scale of the instability faced by communities in North Kivu.
Well, it's a situation that has lasted for decades, as you said in your introduction. An average 10 people have been killed every single day in attacks by armed groups over the last year. And this is a never-ending story. Unfortunately, it doesn't get enough attention. neither from the Congolese authorities in Kinshasa, apart from declaring useless, pointless action decisions like the state of siege, nor from the international community or international opinion. So this is a situation that deserves much more attention to address the root causes of the conflict in the East, including the impunity for serious crimes committed over the last 25 years, and also through diplomatic, economic, and social means.
Jean Moubert Senga there from Amnesty International speaking to me. Well, Niger has the highest population growth in the world. That puts its education system under a lot of pressure. Many children drop out of school to work in order to help their families. The government's tried to tackle the issue of child labour, but there's still a long way to go. Our correspondents tell us more.
This young boy with a red hat sells small bags of drinking water for a living. He starts work every day at 8 a.m. He claims to be 16 years old, but he looks no more than 13.
Usually I take a break to eat, and I get back to work at 2 p.m. At the end of the day, I only head back home after the first prayer of the evening at around 8 p.m. When I sell a lot, the woman who employs me pays me 8 euros per month. Most of the time, it's around 5 euros.
Dropping out of school put him in this situation, but he says it could be worse. A lot of early school dropouts do not have a second chance. In Niger, 57% of boys aged 15 to 24 are neither at school nor working. Niger's successive governments have tried to address the issue of education, but there's still a long way to go.
Some students don't even have the money to take the bus to get here. This is what forces some classmates to skip class, to work instead and make some money.
Psychology research professor Fatima Mayaki believes that students are influencing the rest of the population towards better education for the youth.
When there are more students, there's more open-mindedness. There's a lot more attraction towards different fields of studies and science. It can inspire young people who have stayed in their villages, and hopefully make the government invest more in higher education.
University remains a fortunate aspiration for many young Africans. In sub-Saharan Africa in 2022, at least 104 million people had dropped out of school before turning 18.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. See you again. Take care.